Have you ever gotten glowing feedback from a professor or advisor and wondered, is this really good enough to publish? Have you ever hovered over that submit button, wondering whether you are ready for whatever the decision may be? Hey, co-authors. In this episode, we break down the most common indicators that your manuscript isn't quite submission ready, as well as the markers for success. You'll learn how to spot problems before reviewers do, and how to fix them with confidence. So let's dive in. So a couple of weeks ago, I was at the National Communication Association conference, which is one of the largest conferences in my discipline, and I was doing a talk with young scholars about publishing and teaching and all the things that it means to be a professor in a discussion panel. And one of the students asked the question, how do I know that what I have is ready for publication? And it was funny because I kind of stood there with my mouth agape for just a couple of seconds because I was like, wow, I don't really think consciously to myself whether or not something's ready for publication. I just work to the point to where I know that it is because I've just been doing this for that long. But that wasn't how I started. Whenever I was a master's or doctoral student, like the student in the audience, I didn't really know what it meant to have something that was submission ready. And so that made me think over the past holiday week of doing an episode on how do you know what you have is ready for publication? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about those indicators that you might have, that what you have might not quite be submission ready yet. And then we're going to talk about ways to know that your manuscript is ready to be published. Okay, so let's dive in. Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea. So to start off, before I get into the problems that oftentimes face manuscripts before they get submitted, I think a lot of early career professionals, early career professors, doctoral students, and master's students have questions about where the line is between good writing and publishable writing. A lot of times what happens is that professors give feedback to their students or their advisees, and they might write in the margins or say to them after class, hey, that was really good, you should get that published. And what they really mean by that is, it was very good and I enjoyed reading it in a way that I usually don't enjoy reading a lot of student work. Because if you're a professor, you know, you read a lot of bad essays before you get to read the one or two good ones that you get. Quick life pro tip. If you have a whole bunch of essay assignments from students, take a quick look through them, figure out which ones you think are going to be the strongest ones, and then interdisperse those through the stack. So that way you don't have to read 20 bad essays before you get to your first good one, because that poor person who's the 20th person, they're going to get all of your frustration and ire, right? So just take the good ones, kind of put them through the stack so that way you're like, oh, here's a little gem. Oh, well, I liked that one. So that way it helps you truck through all of those essays that you're going to have to grade. Also, Godspeed as we enter finals in the next couple of weeks. But a lot of students take this at face value and they start submitting their work and then they get rejected and then they don't know what's going on. And if they never really get close mentoring in their doctoral programs, then they're going on to becoming professors. And because they don't have that research experience, they're most likely at a more teaching intensive university, which means that the other faculty in their department might also not have a really strong publication background. So they really can't mentor the new faculty either. And so no one really knows what to do and how to get publication ready. Because of this problem, I think a lot of journals get sent a lot of stuff that's not ready. It ends up wasting editors' time. It ends up wasting reviewers' time. And as a result, you can start to get a bad reputation by sending out work that's not ready. If your discipline uses any type of large platform, most of the journals in my discipline are through Taylor and Francis, but I'm sure that other platforms have similar things. As editors, we can see how many times you submitted to a journal and whether those submissions were accepted, revised and resubmit, rejected, desk rejected. And so if you send something and I'm like, this doesn't really look close to the journal and I type your name into the database and I see, oh, well, you've submitted 5 other things. They've all been desk rejected. I'm probably just going to give it a desk reject too, because you still haven't figured out after 5 other times how to connect with this journal's audience. Why would I do it on the 6th time, right? So you don't want to just send things out willy-nilly, because then you can quickly find yourself getting rejections based on the reputation that you've created for yourself. So knowing that, then, what are some red flags for you as you're thinking about, is my manuscript submission ready? The first one, and I've kind of already touched on this a little bit, but I do want to drive it home, is just because the paper got you an A in the class, even in a doctoral programs class, that does not mean that it's publication ready. There are a lot of reasons why the paper may have gotten an A or that you made an A in the class overall. As an instructor, what we're trying to do in a doctoral program is make sure that you have some mastery of whatever literature that we believe is the thing that's going to set you up for success in this field of study. And we might ask you to write a literature review or to do a full-blown research project on your own in the class as a way for you to test your mastery of that knowledge. So you getting an A in that class is us saying you have mastered the content of the class, which sets you up, if you continue in this vein, to be an expert in this field and perhaps to publish. That is not an indicator, though, that what you have written is immediately publishable. I mean, if that were the case, if every first-year doc student's first paper for their class was publishable, then my God, then like why spend 4, 5, 6 more years in a doctoral program and learn all this stuff and develop all these skills if the very first thing that you ever wrote for your doctoral program was publication worthy? So just because an instructor tells you, oh, you should try to go get this published, that's not necessarily them telling you to actually go get this published. That might just be a way for them to compliment you and to tell you that it's good and to say that your writing level and what you're doing is at that level. That might not be an indicator that this particular project, though, is publication ready. That being said, I'm going to talk about how to suss out whether or not it actually is later in the episode, so stay tuned for that. I will make a small addition to this as well, which is to say there are few things worse as a journal editor than the end of semesters. And the reason for that is because grad students, particularly doc students, they get back 2, 3, 4 different papers that they've worked on for their graduate coursework. They got A's on them. They thought that they were all publication worthy because they made an A. And so they immediately turn around and submit that work to journals. They might even submit it to the same journal. So as a journal editor, I might get 2, 3, 4 different submissions from the same person. This is just a bad practice in general. Unless you are writing regularly, doctoral students and early career faculty should not be submitting multiple things to the same journal because you're probably not skilled enough to pull off all the projects. It is better for you to have one project that you are very invested in, that you are making sure that it meets the goals and crosses the finish line, than for you to submit 4 things and none of them get published. Whenever you submit multiple things, especially if they are closely aligned in what their content is, as an editor then, I have to find multiple reviewers to review that stuff. Well, I might have a few disciplinary experts in a particular area that might be able to address your specific project. But if you submit 2 or 3 projects all at once, I quickly run out of reviewers. So now, if I send all of it out, you're probably getting B or C tier reviewers. More likely, though, I'm going to desk reject whatever I feel is your weakest contributions because I don't want to send those out to reviewers and waste reviewer time. The other thing to think about is, as a doctoral student or early career faculty, you have not established yourself enough to do a lot of review work yet. So every time you submit something, you're taking resources from the journal. Reviewers are not paid. If an editor is good, they're being very protective of that and desk rejecting a lot. But if they're not, which most journal editors are not, they're sending out way too much stuff to reviewers and wasting a lot of reviewer time. Because you are not yet reviewing, you are not giving anything back to this community, and you're taking a lot of resources. So again, it's really important to be strategic here. If you continue to do this, you're going to develop a reputation as being a taker in your discipline, as being someone who continuously is asking for the resources of the journal to review work that ultimately doesn't get published and then doesn't increase the audience of the journal, doesn't increase readership, doesn't have any payoff for the journal. And then you can't review because you haven't established yourself as an expert because you haven't published anything. And so at the end of the day, you've just wasted a bunch of resources, and that's going to be a reputation that follows you. All that is to say, make sure that whenever you submit things, that you are being very strategic and investing in that project, and don't just be submitting a whole bunch of stuff just because you got A's in your classes. The second problem that I oftentimes see whenever people are trying to decide whether their manuscript is ready or not is, I think a lot of folks, they write on something for a long time. They've been working on it so long that at some point in time, they just look at it and they go, you know what, I'm done with this and I just want feedback. And so I'm going to send it to a journal. Again, like I was just saying before, journals are becoming increasingly overburdened. I'll just give you an example. The journal that I'm editing right now, by the end of the year, we will have had more submissions in this year than we had in the past 2 years combined. That is a function of both AI and not just AI slop, but also AI helping international scholars who English is not their first language submit to an outlet that they may not have been able to submit to before. It's a function of the publish or perish mentality, where a whole bunch of people are seeing publication as a way of advancing in their career. And it's a function of graduate students who are caught up in this system where there are fewer positions that are open. And so they are using publication as a way of differentiating themselves on the job market. And so all this is to say, a whole bunch of people are submitting more and more work to journals. I know that at least in my discipline, we are having very frank conversations about reviewers and making sure that they are protected and that they are not overburdened. I think that there was a general culture among academia that as an editor, you should err on the side of sending things out for review, and that it's always better to get people a little bit of feedback, and it's a way of getting them professional development. And there's enough reviewers and there's enough resources for us to kind of live in this system of largesse. That is no longer the case. There's too much stuff being submitted, and there's not enough reviewers, creating a huge problem. And so editors are being encouraged more nowadays to desk reject things. And so if you have been working on a project and you're not quite sure if it's ready or not, but I'll just send it in for publication and see if I can get some feedback, what you're probably going to do is get a desk rejection, in which case you're not going to get any feedback. And so you've just wasted your time. Or you're going to send it to a journal. You are going to get feedback. Maybe that feedback is good, maybe it's not. But if you do that again and again, and it keeps coming back as a rejection, yeah, you got feedback. But after a while, editors are going to wise up and go, hey, this person keeps submitting things, but it always gets rejected. I'm just going to desk reject it then. Protect my reviewers' time and resources. Because there's this scarcity of resources, and because editors can see what your submission history looks like, at least for whatever particular outlet they're in charge of, it is in your best interest to make sure that you are always submitting things that you know are ready and not submitting things just to get feedback. If you want feedback, there are conferences. There are workshops. You can hire a writing coach. Hi, how's it going? You can get a colleague to help you. There are 1,000,001 ways for you to get feedback that don't require you to use resources that are better used elsewhere, or to develop a reputation that ends up working against you for the rest of your career. The third problem that I see, and I know that I've talked about this before in other episodes, but it is the lack of attention to detail as it relates to your writing and the norms of the journal and whatever style guide is a part of that journal's submission, whether that's APA, MLA, Chicago, whatever it is. I can't tell you how many submissions as an editor over the past 3 years that I've been editing the journal that I oversee, that work has come in and it is structured in ways that are completely different than what is published in the journal. It's missing information that always been published in the journal, or it has added information that's never been in the journal, or you just look at it and you're like, this looks like a freshman's compositions class level of attention to detail of the style guide, right? I don't care how much you've published in the past. I don't care how long you've been in this field. I don't care about any of those things. If I look at your work and it's riddled with all sorts of stylistic errors, that makes me question your credibility of being detail-oriented in other parts of the manuscript. As I've said in previous episodes, so much of what we do is in this sort of black box. Our analysis of our data, the actual interactions that we might have with our participants, or the way that our surveys are constructed, or the way that we analyzed our data, any of those things, every bit of the detail of that process is not in the writing. And so all of the things that are hidden then, I have to trust you as the author that you did those things correctly. And so whenever I see a submission that is replete with all sorts of stylistic errors, then I think to myself, well, God, I mean, I can see your level of attention to detail to this. What lies in store if I were to peek just a little bit behind the curtain and see what this person has done whenever no one's looking? And so if you're submitting work and you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, I just want to make sure that I get my ideas out there and all of that stylistic stuff, I'll deal with that in the production phase. Well, no, you won't, because it's not even going to get published, because no one is going to trust your work. As an editor, if I see a whole bunch of errors like that, I'm going to reject it. I'm not even going to inflict that on reviewers and make them slog through 20, 30, 40 pages of prose that has just been poorly organized and does not meet the stylistic guidelines. If you can't do this right, then I have less confidence that you can do those things if you can't even get the stylistic guide, which is something that even second year undergraduate students can do. So the last thing I would say is more on the emotional side, which is whenever you're submitting this work, are you submitting it and you think to yourself, this is going to be the thing that makes or breaks my career. This is the thing that I've invested all of myself into. If this gets rejected, I don't know if I can go on. Because if that's the case, then you don't need to submit it. Nothing that you write should have that feeling to you. And part of that is because if you are doing this for a career, you're looking at 30 years of research. If you were to publish one thing a year, that's 30 pieces of scholarship. So it would be unlikely that one thing out of 30 would define your career for you. But the other thing is, if you have this idea that publication is this apex achievement, and you've really kind of put it on this pedestal in your mind of, oh, well, if I don't get that, then I can't be happy. And then what you're going to find is that whenever you do inevitably get a rejection, because maybe not on this project, but on some project, you are bound to get a rejection, then that's going to really knock you on your butt. And you're going to feel like you're directionless and that you don't know what to do with that. And you might send a snarky email back to an editor or complain about it on your social media or do some other career damaging thing that you don't need to do. And all of that is because you have not prepared yourself emotionally for the idea that this might not make it. On the other hand, don't think to yourself, oh, this will never make it, right? If you think to yourself, oh, it will never make it, then you will never be in a place where you can confidently and correctly judge the worth of your work and whether or not it is good enough to go for publication, in which case, then you might never submit things because you feel this imposter syndrome and you never feel good enough. You need to publish not just in order to maintain your job, but also because that allows you to bring cutting edge work to your students. It helps you satisfy your curiosity, and it puts you in a conversation with other like-minded scholars around the world who are a community and who can really help you understand the complexities of the things that are going on in whatever the field of study that it is that you have. Okay, so we've talked about a few of the red flags that comes with knowing whether your work is ready for publication or not. So let's talk about some ways that you can make sure that your work is ready to submit. First off, you should always try to make sure that you get independent feedback from a colleague or a friend, preferably both, before you submit. If you have a piece of scholarship that you think is ready, you should have a colleague who is a part of that field of study read it, and they can give you a more expert read on it. But you can also give it to a trusted friend or maybe a family member who might not be able to know all the nuances of the ideas that you're getting into, but they can help you make sure that your prose is inviting to a reader, that it helps a person make sense of something. And so having both of those types of feedback can be incredibly helpful. If you have a professor who has told you, oh, this is good, you should get it published, you are going to need to suss out whether that's true or whether that's just them giving you a compliment. And here's how you do that. If they say that to you, you should later email them. Don't say this to them in person, but email them and ask, hey, professor, you said this was good enough to be published. Thank you so much for your kind words. Did you have some journals in mind that I might start looking at to submit my work to? Now, I said send that in an email because if you say that to them face to face and they were just paying you a nice compliment, you've now put them on the spot and they might not have thought that far ahead. And then they're going to be a little embarrassed because they didn't really think that your work was good enough for a specific journal. They just thought that it was, in general, good writing. You don't want to do that. You don't want to put them on the spot. But at least in this way, you can figure out whether they are giving you a compliment as feedback or if they are giving you career advice as feedback, because those are two different things and they serve two different functions. So if they say, yes, here are 2 or 3 journals that I think are really good, here's why, here's what's been published there in the past. If they really go all out, hey, then you know this is more career-oriented advice. If they're like, oh yeah, you might try this journal. Well, maybe they're just giving you a compliment then. No, there's nothing wrong with that, but now you know. So if they say, yeah, here's a couple of journals that I think would be really good fits, they might also say, and I'd be willing to be a co-author with you to help you get it to a place to where it could be submitted there. Cool. Now you've got a decision to make on whether or not you want to co-author with your professor or your advisor. If they don't make that offer, you might in turn offer them, oh, thank you so much for the advice. Would you like to set up a meeting sometime and we can discuss whether or not you think that this is good enough to submit now? Or maybe it would require more work. And would you be willing to be a co-author on this piece with me and to help me get this to a place where it's published? Now you've had a conversation with them that gives you that next step. Maybe it's not quite there, but you do see the potential of it. And here's how we can get it to that next level. Maybe it's with a co-authorship. Again, if they give you one journal and whenever you ask them about co-authorship, they're like, maybe, then you know, okay, you're not really giving me career advice here. You've given me a compliment on my writing, but that's not the same thing as career advice. And so being able to suss that out is important. So again, making sure that you have a colleague or friend read it. And if your principal person that you get feedback from is your professor, sussing out whether or not that feedback that you're getting from them is from a place of a compliment or career oriented, and then taking that next step of, is this something that I want to solo author or am I co-authoring with them? And this might all be a moot point because you might even be in a discipline where you are expected to be a co-author with your professors all the time. I have huge ethical problems with that, but I get that's how some disciplines run. But if you are not in a discipline where that is just the norm de facto, then having this space might be a way for you to develop your writing and publication record a little bit more. The next thing to know if your work is ready or not is that you should always be completely done with data collection. Every once in a while, I'll get a submission and it'll say exploratory study, and it'll have like 5, 10, maybe 15 people who are a part of it, if it's a qualitative project, where it might have like 20, 30, 50 people in a survey, and it'll say exploratory study. The authors will even say, well, you know, because this is exploratory, we didn't really have the statistical power that we needed because we didn't have enough participants, or we don't really have saturation in our themes because we didn't have enough participants. But, you know, it's an exploratory study, so that's okay. No, it's not okay. I'm sorry. There's very few reasons why you would do an exploratory study or any study that you have not completed. Either you have gathered enough data to make the claims that you need to make in your paper, and you can show this is how it's adding on to the literature, and this is how the data that I've collected and treated helps me develop this body of literature, or you haven't. There are very, very few times in my career where I have seen people receive a revise and resubmit decision, and part of that R&R was you should go out and gather more data. At the point that you're gathering more data, it's practically a new project at that point, in which case it just needs to be a new submission. You should always be completely done with your data collection. It should be closed. You should not have to add new data to your writing. The third thing that you should do is create a checklist of both the journal standards and norms. So what are the things in the journal style guide? Because even though journals say that they follow APA or MLA or whatever, they oftentimes have their own standards that are journal specific. They will also have norms. So for example, in the journal that I edit, almost every piece that you see submitted, their methodology section will be participants, procedures, data analysis. It will be those 3 things. And they will have particular information that is expected to show up in those 3 sections. So if I get a submission and it doesn't have those 3 sections or doesn't have the information in the correct section, then it's violating my sense of normalcy and already gives me a dim view of the author because it makes me think that they are not a part of the conversation that's happened in this journal. If you were, you would have written this in the same way that everyone else has written this in the past 15, 20, 30 years. And so it's important for you to have a checklist of both the journal's standards and its norms. Make sure that you're hitting those things, and know that you might have multiple versions of your document that would be submitted to different journals. Your submission will look different because journal submission guidelines might be different depending on the journal outlet, the publisher of that journal, all sorts of things. So it's important for you to have that checklist and to make sure that your work is consistent with that community of scholarship. Also, and I can't stress this enough, follow your style guides. I mean, it should not have to be said, but I think that for a lot of people, they think that the strength of their ideas and the soundness of their arguments makes up for the fact that their citation style is just terrible. That is not the case. You do your credibility no service whenever you engage in writing practices that show a lack of care and a lack of rigor to following established guidelines. Those guidelines are not there as suggestions. They're there to aid that community of scholars in evaluating the work by making sure that the prose is not the thing that gets in the way of the ideas. If we're all following those style guidelines the way that they should be, then there should be no hangups in style or in tone. Instead, we should be able to just focus on the ideas and the merits of those ideas. And so if you have a whole bunch of errors in your writing, that's interrupting the flow of your reader and giving them a negative evaluation of your competence and maybe even your character and trustworthiness as a writer. The final thing that I will say, and this is to address that more emotional side, is that you need to have multiple projects that are in your pipeline. And I'm going to have an entire episode on developing your pipeline of scholarship. But for right now, just know that a well-functioning pipeline should be a thing is coming out, you have a thing that is submitted, you have a thing that is in the sort of conceptual stage. You have 3 things at any given time. There might be some fluctuation in that, but roughly speaking, that's the case. The reason that you do that is not just for efficiency, but because if you have 3 projects that are in these different stages, then you know that the thing that you are submitting right now is neither the be-all, end-all, nor is it a thing that fails and then ends up becoming yet another self-fulfilled prophecy of failure that just feeds your imposter syndrome. Instead, you have enough projects that it's still manageable, and yet at the same time, none of those projects takes on a sense of importance that consumes your life. There are going to be times whenever you have a project that is your pet project. It's going to be the thing that you do really pour yourself into and that you really feel like this is going to be the thing that really does kind of make my mark or says the thing that I want to say or whatever it might be. But that's not every project. It can't be every project. Everything that you write can't be the best thing that you've ever written. Sometimes you write things because you're curious and it's interesting. Sometimes you write things because you have to. Sometimes you write things because it's an opportunity. There are 1,000,001 reasons why you write, but you are not going to be in a place where everything that you write is this super important thing. Being able to be in an emotional space where you can accept criticism, accept rejection, and accept that sometimes a project might not even be salvageable, that you've done something, that you've made some methodological choice that can't be undone. And so that all the work that you've done has to just be flushed down the toilet. And that hurts and it sucks. It can't be the end of you. And the only way that that happens is by having enough projects going at any given time that you are able to invest yourself into those projects, but not overinvest yourself. Overall, what I would say is that as you continue to submit things, you get rejections, you get acceptances, you get revisions, you get all these things, and you go through this process of publication, you should be learning from each one of those experiences. So that way, as you develop as a scholar, you begin to develop this 6th sense of whether or not something is publication worthy or not. At this point in my career, like I said at the beginning of this, whenever the student asked me, how do you know something's publication ready? It's hard for me to even name that in words in some ways at this point in my life because I've done it for so long and I've done it so often that I can just look at a project now and go, yep, that's going to be the version that's going to do it. Or I look at it and go, there's something about it that's not quite there yet. And that's not to say that whenever I submit things, it automatically gets accepted and I never have revisions. That's certainly not the case. I have sometimes minor, sometimes very extensive revisions. But you do get into a place to where you can go, I know that this project has legs I know it's going to go places. I know it's going to go where I need it to go. And now it's ready for me to submit it. And that comes from experience and practice. And so what you can't do is submit something, get rejected, get disheartened, and then never try again, because then you're never going to develop that sense and you're never going to develop your writing. If you've ever played baseball or softball, there are times whenever you hit the ball and you just know, just the feeling that you have, that's going to be a home run. Or there's times whenever you hit it and you know, ooh, that's not going anywhere that I want it to go. You're going to develop that same sense in your writing. You're going to know whenever you've hit that home run and whenever you haven't. But that only comes through practice and experience. And so I just want to encourage you that if you've been in this space where you've submitted a couple of things and you've gotten rejections and it doesn't feel like you know where to go next, and you're thinking about giving up and you're thinking that publication maybe just isn't for you, I would implore you, please continue. I think a lot of people have really cool ideas. They need to get out there. They need to shake things up. Your voice is one that's going to do that. It's one that matters, and you shouldn't give up. And if you continue in this vein, then eventually you're going to get published. You're going to start to learn through trial and error what are the ways that you can really start to develop your voice and your prose and your impact. And you're going to start contributing to the scholarly communities and being a part of those communities in a way that is both personally and professionally very fulfilling. So that's going to about wrap it up for me, folks. As always, I'm interested to hear what you all have to say. If there are ideas that you have for me for future episodes, I'd love to hear them. I'm trying to make this podcast the best resource that it can be for everyone who listens. If there's any issues, problems, barriers that you're facing that you might want a little advice on, I'm happy to do a podcast episode on it. Also, if there's habits, rituals, tips, tricks, things that you do to get yourself ready for submission, let me know. I'm happy to pass that on to my clients and my own students, and I can even share it on the podcast, and I'm happy to give you a shout out whenever I do another episode on this. If you're looking for someone who might be an outside reader for your work, or to talk through an idea, or to see if something is worth pursuing for publication or not, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. My contact information is in the podcast description. You can set up an appointment with me. My first 30-minute appointment is always free. Happy to talk through things with you. And if you think it would be beneficial for you to have a writing coach, then I'm happy to talk to you about the types of services that I offer. So thank you again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Hey, co-authors. What's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let Reviewer 2 get you down.